Hi everyone. All good here. Thank you.
Hi. We also have Nitin here with us, who's going to be driving the next panel discussion. Abhishek, would you want to start this?
Yeah, sure. Okay, we have Nitin with us. He's our SVP, Head of Product at Samagra. He was a group product manager at Google. He was an engagement manager at McKinsey, and he was a computer scientist at Adobe. So he will be moderating our joint session with Ricardo and Vipul. So over to you, Nitin.
Great. Thank you, Abhishek, and delighted to be meeting all of you, the wonderful C4GD 23 cohort. A very personal welcome from my side as well, and congrats on being participating in this program. I hope you have been enjoying the bootcamp. Maybe give me a quick thumbs up of how the last 2-3 days have been and how today has been for you. Like I don't know if there can be some reactions, right, on Zoom. Is it okay? Good. So I think we are the last thing between you and today evening, or drinks in the evening. But I'm really like I have two outstanding open source champions with me, so I'm really looking forward to this session, where we will get to spend some time with Ricardo Miron Torres, who is the technical lead. Ricardo, I hope I got your name right. At Digital Public Goods Alliance, really the vanguard of digital public goods at an international level. And he completed his master's in software engineering from the University Politécnica de Madrid. And in the past has also been head of operations at Coronado, Mexico, while also being a digital Sherpa at Microsoft and various other things. He also is a very active volunteer in a lot of capacities, and is a real open source and digital public goods champion. So Ricardo, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Nitin.
No, sure. Wonderful to have you. We also have Vipul. Is Vipul online? Do we know? Not yet. Hopefully Vipul should be joining soon. If you can maybe just check and call. And once Vipul joins, I'll welcome him and introduce him to the group as well. So we wanted to have a session today just to get a little bit of, I know you have been doing a lot of specific details and what is the right way to manage your time, participate on the program and all that stuff. Wanted to pull back a little and get a sense of what the evolution has been of the DPG movement and specifically the communities, role of communities in it. And further, what are the opportunities that something like this opens up for engineers, for the talents that we have on this call, right? And hear from really Ricardo and Vipul once he joins as well on that point, right? So Ricardo, maybe I'll open up with a sort of a broader question for you from the point of view, if you could just maybe share your perspective as being part of the DPGA, right? What's the big picture of the DPG movement, right? How has it really evolved or specifically over the last few years? Okay, I think we have Vipul as well. Hey, Vipul, hi. So Ricardo, if I may just take another minute to welcome Vipul too, and then we will get these questions for both of you. Vipul, can you hear us? And maybe if you can spotlight Vipul as well, Abhishek.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, Vipul. Really delighted to have you with us. Thanks for joining in. And for the cohort, so Vipul is also a real open source champion. He's the technical advisor with UNICEF. He completed his computer programming bachelor's from Christ University, Bangalore. And in the past has been the editor for the Fedora community blog for the Fedora project, has been a software engineer at Red Hat, a coordinator at Labyrinth, and also a Google Summer of Code, both participant as well as a mentor, if I get that right, Vipul. So welcome again, and thanks for taking out time for the group.
Yeah, so for GSOC and Outreach, I have been org admins and mentors have not been able to participate because I was out of university by then. I was already doing internship at Red Hat as a software developer by then, so I could not participate as a participant. But yeah, I have been in open source for a while. I also serve on Fedora Council as the DEI advisor. And as you rightly said, I'm right now working with UNICEF as their open source technical advisor. Where I help innovators understand and leverage the power of open source, which very much what you are trying to do here. So a lot of similarity in here. Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. Great to have you both. I think you have all the C4GT context as well. We have about 50 odd, I think, of our participants for this session who would love to hear both of your perspectives. So my first question is a little bit more broad. I would just want to get from your respective sort of vantage points as in the DPGA or UNICEF, if you could share for the group, what is the big picture of DPG movement? How have you seen it evolve and where do you see it heading?
Sure, and maybe I can start. And it's really exciting to see so many of you here. But I'm sure that no matter if you're like an actual software developer student or studying some other topic, we have in some sort of way all benefited from open source. Being most of the programming languages or libraries or web technologies we use or any other components that we use to build like the actual digital solutions are open source, right? So maybe let me start by trying to answer one of the questions that I'm sure many of you have, which is like, what's the actual difference between just plain open source and what's like the difference between a digital public good? Even if being open source is a requirement to be considered a DPG, not all open source is made the same way. So both the DPG definition and the DPG movement, I think, respond to like a clear necessity that societies have to being able to use open digital solutions to help the world's greatest challenges like climate change and food security, gender equality, and so on. But in doing so, there's also these really important considerations and needs that these solutions are inclusive, that are equitable, that do no harm. So I think a lot of the DPG movement come from just adding these considerations into open source and actually designing the solutions in a way that's meant to do good, to put it that way. So just for you to know that even though you would be contributing a lot in like the open source way, you will also be contributing to projects that are making the difference in the world, and that's really exciting. And I see that this is just a movement that keeps growing, that keeps expanding, and that's really important for, especially for developing countries. Like in my case, I'm from Mexico, and I think we share a lot of similarities with India. But yeah, that's really taking off, and that a lot of people are investing, people, organizations, and alliances like the DPGA are taking on this task to helping open source become to the full potential it can be.
Great. No, thanks for that. And yeah, that's a good, important question on many people's mind. And in some sense, DPG is open source plus, like with additional things. But Ripple, would love to hear your perspective too.
No, amazingly highlighted by Ricardo. I just have a couple of more things that I think is very unique about Digital Public Good Alliance. And one, as Ricardo said, there are three main things to be a Digital Public Good Alliance. One, obviously, you need to be open source. So when you are contributing to a DPG, you are obviously contributing to the projects which run the ethos of open source through and through. But the do no harm part, one of the third pillar of Digital Public Good, because as Ricardo said, not every open source is made the same, but about following the right data, the way you can collect data, or the way you give user their privacy and accessibility rights. Those are very important. And when we are working in the most dire or affected states, or the places where proprietary solutions just can't reach, those pieces are very special to us, because we do care about that, do care about the privacy rights of every user, and how it's, because it's a public good, it has to withhold certain standards. And the second part that I see really, that is, as you say, a big part of or big picture of Digital Public Good Alliance is the shared standards and policies, because DPG a multifaceted organization, right? There are people from different governance, different companies, different academia, a lot of different places. One of the biggest challenges, if you think about open source, is how do you bridge the gap between a global community and local requirement, right? There are so many projects that's open source, but because of the lack of information or understanding on it that they exist, NGOs and governments waste a lot of resources because they don't know that something exists and they can adopt it and use it. And even if you know about it, the standards are very complex to understand. Can you simply take something and use it? because IP laws, copyright law, there are so many differences. How licenses are used in different contexts from software, hardware, content, and obviously now we are talking about open data and open AI models a lot. So having a shared standard which everyone can get on board and trust, I think that's one of the big key pieces of bridging the gap between global community and local requirement. So yeah, in my opinion, I think that's one of the, and when you want to invest in a tool, a software, a solution on a national capacity, something like DPGA or having a solution DPGA registered or approved or listed on the registry, it really brings that or makes it much easier to follow, because it is up to certain standards and it's not just a bathwater project as we call it in open source, just a project slapped with open source license and sitting dormant on GitHub or GitLab or somewhere.
Yeah. No, I think very well sort of articulated. It's like the ISI stamp or the FSSAI stamp, right? Like that you see on a lot of food, sort of retail material. And if that is there, you trust that it meets a certain bar and criteria, and you don't have to bother about all these questions, which otherwise you are left wondering about. Cool. So I think, so that's the DPG movement. Maybe I'll ask a little bit more also about how have you seen the evolution? Like, have things really picked up in the last few years, or were they always this hot? And where do you see this heading?
Yeah, and I think there's a special movement around like digital public infrastructure, which is another term yet that's been thrown around. But that's specifically speaking about these like foundational technologies that country needs to implement. And I think great part of this movement has actually come from India and from things like UPI or Aadhaar and the open source efforts that are trying to replicate this digital identity payment layer, data exchange layer, which are really important for countries to innovate and to develop new solutions on top of that, right? So I see a lot of conversation around that, and as I said, like especially in developing countries, there's a lot of like need for this digital sovereignty. So anywhere from each region has its own challenges and its own focuses. For example, I can say in Latin America, a lot of like the open government and like civic tech movement is picking up these kind of open source DPG solutions and trying to implement it for these use cases. In a lot of Asia's the disaster relief tools and different technologies. So I think there's like definitely a need, and as I've seen also in the past, it's also a question of how we allocate resources to solve these problems, and I think the basic thing that's needed is these foundational technologies that I was talking about, and I think that there's where it's definitely growing and growing within countries, but also within civil society to implement and have these technologies, but as I said, like be built in certain way that are inclusive and that there are like these safeguards that it's not going to be used maybe for monitoring people or for necessarily like doing bad stuff. So that I think that's part of where I think it's mostly picking up, and that it's also ramificating to a lot of other sectors, right? So there's a lot of DPGs on agriculture, a lot of DPGs on healthcare. So maybe we will talk a little bit more about some specific examples and maybe some of the specific DPGs that you would even be contributing to.
Great. Vipul, anything to add? I mean, it kind of felt like, and maybe it would be helpful for our audience also if you could connect the DPG and DPIs, and maybe in context of your global standards and local sort of requirements also, right? Maybe is that a bridge in there between?
Yeah, exactly. Like again, Ricardo covered the side of from the registry perspective of how we are focusing on different kind of, if you say sustainable development goals, right? How are we empowering the SDGs that we have not touched yet? But if you think about just generally from the general where DPG is right now, I call it the third wave of open source, and it's a common shared understanding. Earlier, open source used to be all about hobbyists. And then comes the corporations who start making businesses around it, and open source takes another acceleration. And now where we are, it's very much about different intercontinental organizations like UN, UNICEF, UNDP, right? Ricardo is from UNDP, I'm here from UNICEF, and so many others like that. and intercontinental organizations, but also governance. A lot of government agencies interested in how can we do more open source. So I really see this as the third wave of open source, and DPGA is one way or another accelerating and empowering that. And when governments do that, they are doing it not just for trying to solve one solution, but set an infrastructure for general people. And that's where digital public infrastructure comes in. A set of different digital public goods together build a platform empowering your citizens to do something more than that. It's not just you consume solution, you solve something, end of it. DPIs produces and accelerates more DPGs, in my opinion, because if you have a good public infrastructure that everyone is consuming and learning from it or utilizing it, you understand how valuable it is. So it's that bridge that we need for, again, we all know when we are working with government, how much bureaucracies and policy challenges has come through. All right. When we talk about ethos of open source, we cannot restrict commercial use cases, but you talk to anyone from government that, oh, we are going to develop a software that someone will be able to build a business on, that's a big no-no, because non-commercial is a of course accepted thing when we talk about something developed by government agencies. So having DPG working from the digital public infrastructure and public goods, it empowers government to get that clear insight into it. And when they see that, okay, this is not just by anyone, but it is by people who are part of it, who have been doing it for a long time. And it started with Norwegian government of Sierra Leone. And now if you go to the members list of all digital public goods, there are so many government agencies in there, right? So that's how I have seen it being evolved. Obviously touching different, as Ricardo mentioned, touching different sustainable development goals sector. How is an open source solution helping with life on the ocean? Right? How are we doing more? We all understand when we talk about infrastructure and open innovation, from Linux operating system to Kubernetes and all these deployment platforms that we have, they are open source. But when we talk about how are we handling no poverty, how are we doing more on, again, quality education, very simple one. But when we talk about gender equality, how is open source driving that factor? So digital public good, because we focus on that SDG relevance, which is one of the biggest, again, third pillar of it. I mentioned open source and no harm. Second is must advance sustainable development goals. Having that map of different solution really empowers us to think about where should we focus next. And evolution happens when you are always looking forward to a continuous improvement. And I do see DPGA doing that a lot, be it from standards or be it from the registry.
Right. Got it. I think this is a good segue into, I think, what something Ricardo was also mentioning. And while there are some obvious examples that a lot of our participants are aware of, like in terms of DPI, like UPI and the payment stack in India and the identity stack, etc., would be great to get from your experience, like some other examples other than these, and maybe some international examples where you have really seen open source contributions or contributions to DPGs really having landed a lot of impact. And maybe one or two also, as you're saying, SDG areas where there is a lot of need, but there hasn't been that much movement yet. So some success and somewhere you would want to see more success.
Sure, and I think I can share an example that we always like to share, and maybe I'm repeating myself too much everywhere, but it's this open source platform called DHIS2, which is a digital health information system. It's a open source project, but that was started by the University of Oslo, and it's adopted for around 80 countries or something like that. So almost a third of the world is using, or at least in some sort of manner, being served by this healthcare open source information system, which in itself, it's already a proof of how open source can really scale up and within certain areas really help, right? But the interesting story here is that when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, of course, a lot of our healthcare systems all over the world were super stressed, and a lot of the logistical challenges in trying to deal with the pandemic were the focus, of course, of that moment. So one of these countries that was using the DHIS2 is called several developers to jointly try to figure out how they could leverage their use of the DHIS2, right? So this example, it begins in Sri Lanka. They developed this contact tracing app that basically helps them figure out COVID-19 cases in airports, in hospitals, and in other like public places. And the tracker mainly did like the registration of travelers arriving into certain places. And it was created, I think, just within like a couple of days of them registering their first like COVID-19 case. And it was quickly deployed, but it was also made publicly available as an open source project as well. And the reason that it was made possible to kind of develop this application in like such small amount of time, it was because it was based on this digital health information system. So they publish it not only with the necessary technical documentation, but also with the necessary license and with the global community that DHIS2 already has in all of these 80 plus countries, which have this regional and local capacity to kind of help develop further on, right? So this tracker then was adopted by around other 38 countries, sorry. And it was scaled up like just within a couple of months as like just open source collaboration between having the same information system and then building on top of that. So I think this is like a really, really inspiring use case that I see the contributions from the open source community have had like a real impact on society and have like solved some of the problems we had from the pandemic. But I could see this being applied for a lot of the different projects and open source technologies that are being recognized as digital public goods and that are part of the contributions that hopefully could also happen from these kind of programs.
Fantastic. Great. Vipul?
That is one of my favorite examples too, because I think more than how quickly the features were implemented, the more powerful story of DHIS2 is how quickly it was adopted by many countries and accelerated that adoption. And that's what I was mentioning in my first question, or I think second one, where shared standards really does allow everyone to adopt it quickly and innovate on top, right? I'm going through right now registry on what are some of the amazing, because when you asked, oh, name all your friends, and you have so many coming in your mind that you can't name them, right? So DHIS2 Fedora Linux that I have been contributing for 8 years now, and that I'm part of council as well. If you remember, there was a project called, I think, Laptop for Every Child, something like that, where they tried to provide laptop for every child, and Sugar Labs took Fedora Linux. They made a derivative of that, made it into a very educational operating system, very limited, just for education delivering system, and they were able to run it on a very small, lightweight laptop which didn't have a lot of resources, right? That's one of the win. I'm talking about something that I've been part of. But Rapid Pro is something that UNICEF developed, and real-time communication for the required right now, where the real-time data collecting or real-time communication that is allowed refugees, or that is by the most impacted, or the flood sectors, right? So the power of DPG really shines through for the required sectors where they are more impacted from, be it natural causes or be it causes of political problems and things, That's where I see it a lot. And if you go through again, value of open source, any win that you see of open source, very much it's a win of digital public good as well, because open source is such a central part of it, right? We can only do it better by adding some more filtering, making sure that even these open source softwares follow certain standard protocol which are good for people. Because you like the biggest piece that I think about when I think about DPG indicators is the platform independence bit. If you have a solution, again, if DHIS2 was open source, but if it was using a solution which you can't scale easily because it uses some general local proprietary solution requirement in Sri Lanka, how would Sierra Leone be able to scale it, right? Something, some sort of resources that US government can afford, think that Egyptian government cannot afford. So that platform independence, that you only use open source, the whole stack and dependency is open source, and they are platform independent. That is the biggest piece. And any one of these examples that you take, some with bigger community, which allows them to be more sustainable, more adoptable, some without it, but a successful digital public good will have many success stories to share on how it has been adapted and taken care of. I'll share the link for Rapid Pro. Definitely check it out. It's one of the most powerful projects that is impacting every day, right? Including things like also Seaboard, a language. I'll share those links in the chat for everyone
That'd
to
be
go
great.
through.
Yeah, I'm sure our
Yeah.
contributors would love that, to explore more of these things. But I really like that angle of, as you're saying, platform independence and sort of impact relevance, right? Really the things that get added on. And therefore, there's much more when you are contributing to a DPG than just learning. There's also the impact that you are creating and the legacy it is creating for future impact too. And specifically in areas where the communities may be marginalized, where the marginal impact of this thing that you do is so much more greater, right? Because there is no other better solution. So wonderful. That's also a good, I think you mentioned the word communities, which I would link on to move to my next question, right? What is the role of communities in the success or failure of DPGs? Does every successful DPG have a community as well? What difference does it make? Or can some succeed without a community too? Or like, why is that important? And what have you seen?
Yeah, and I can say that this varies a lot because DPGs come from all over the place, right? So we have some DPGs that even come from Google and of course have like enough resources and developers to be able to sustain themselves without much need from contributions. But we of course encourage the contribution for community not only as a sustainable way to build your project, but also a way to open up and this really depends on the governance on your project and so many other things, to open up to the possibility of us, the possible users or the people building these technologies, to have different perspectives and to input directly into the project what we think it should be moving forward to. So I see that as like one of the key roles of the communities, of course. But we have as well like several projects that have been developed as a community, and without the community they wouldn't even exist, like OpenStreetMap or like Wikipedia, which are considered like these digital commons and that are really built up by the community truly. So I guess it varies a lot. There are certain models where maybe DPGs will not need that much of a community, but I think it's a good mechanism overall, also to help identify and detect the priorities for those kind of solutions, and others may be more intrinsically related to these communities, right? So I guess it really depends, but from what I've seen, a lot of the DPGs are trying to build and sustain active communities, especially local communities who can help also build the specific implementations and the specific features needed for the different scenarios that these solutions are going to be used to, right? So people put the example of Rapid Pro, which I think is really interesting because the thing that you never know with open source is like how it's going to be, how someone's going to use your project or in which context, right? So before I joined the UN, I was working on a civic tech community, and we used Rapid Pro to make, for example, chatbots for finding missing people in Central America. And I know certain governments use Rapid Pro like to send out like massive messages to citizens for like when there's an earthquake or a natural disaster. So these are use cases that the solution was not necessarily designed for, but that have been out there just because it was open source, and there were local communities involved in trying to use these tools and then contributing back. Because I remember that we were trying to implement like this like chatbot for finding missing people, and they were like some small bugs within Rapid Pro like local implementations for Spanish. So we sent out those like fixes back into the contribution channels, and I think that's something that's not measurable within how a community could really help with this. And maybe it's a really small thing, but maybe something bigger that has a greater impact that sometimes you're not even being able to assess or to track, but that that's the beauty of open source.
Great. Thank you, Vipul. You want to comment?
Yeah, to the point of Ricardo, it truly is no strings attached. And if you don't have certain licenses which empower collaboration or incentivize collaboration, like a copyleft license, you really can't see how you're making impact. And that is, again, that just comes with the way open source is, right? Everyone, it allows that freedom to use it how they see fit. But again, even Rapid Pro is used by UReport, which is UNICEF's biggest thing on how we collect report from children and how we are creating impact. So it really is one of the marvelous tools that Office of Innovation, where I work, has created way before. Like I think it's like 10 years now or something like that. So it's everywhere. And if you think about how digital infrastructure is set right now, we are all empowered by open source. The servers that we are using to the phone or Firefox or the VLC to the Android and everything that we are using is empowered by open source. The moment you make something proprietary, innovation stops after a couple more layers where you can use APIs and things, but it cannot be continued forward. So I don't know if you have seen that XKCD comic where it says that one guy maintaining a library in Nebraska and then the whole modern digital infrastructure is based on that. That truly is open source on how the whole digital infrastructure is based on that. But talking about community, I want to double down on what Ricardo said, the sustainability perspective. Right? If you think about DPG, again, it's not a certification, it's a registry. And how do you ensure sustainability of a community or a project? Be it the following the same roadmap, following the governance, long term being able to follow through. And the reason why open source is powerful, that when MySQL was about to go proprietary or what the license was about to change in not super open source friendly, MariaDB came out, and that can still be accessible by students all over the world to practice and learn or to deploy their software on, right? So that community, and again, that DHIS2 example that Ricardo mentioned, the reason it was being able to use and we could develop, or Sri Lanka community could develop it in 2 days, the feature, and then adopted by so many, because there was a community around it, because people knew how to utilize it. Without community, there must be a corporation behind pushing for the use case. Otherwise, the same, if you think about the first answer that I gave, so many NGOs and government organizations don't realize that something like this exists. So community is not just about contributors. Community is also your word of mouth, and they share exactly the use cases that something can be used for. So adopting when you are trying to put open source and your solution beyond or transcends boundaries and cross-border collaboration, community is one of the key pieces on how it can be adopted and accelerated adoption, right? So I think, yeah, community, I come from community. I'm a community guy through and through. I started as a user of open source, then contribution in multiple, then my internship was for open source, then full-time job, and now I'm driving open source at UNICEF. And I have seen community as the biggest, the giants who lend shoulder for someone to rise on. That goes same for individuals and for projects. So for me, community is one of the key pillars of success of open source projects.
Yeah, wonderful. And as you said, I think not just about contributing only and learning. So they also play an active role in adopting and evangelizing. And I think toward Ricardo's point, in connecting the dots and letting new use cases flower, right? When you connect across communities. So an important role, which then leads to sort of the natural question. And from your experience, are there some factors that make it more likely for a community to succeed? Like, are there some characteristics that help a community thrive? And because I think with C4GT and this program and the overall, we're also trying to set up a community. This is an entry into it. But there's also a continuous community building program too. We would love to hear, and I'm sure our contributors would also love to share from you, what are some of those 2 or 3 things that you should try to get right, or good communities get right?
Yeah, there's like the basic stuff that you, as a product owner of an open source project, need to set up and able to start building a community, which is like having the right contribution channels, right? If your code is public in some way, like just having a way that people can contribute and then can familiarize with your project, having like enough documentation on that side is important. And I think yeah, just having things like a code of conduct, having community channels, those are like the basic things any open source project needs to have in order to start building these communities. But then as important as that is also just the spirit of the project and how it's managed, like the governance, letting the communities also have a play and a role on how the project is being developed, or having a say on the different roadmap and activities. And I think this is where you can strongly have different communities, not only of contributors, as people rightly mentioned, but also communities of implementers, communities of practice that talk and use your solution, communities of governments that are even like adopting these kind of technologies. So I think there are different aspects of how these communities should be able to succeed into this path, which requires quite a bit of effort. Like some people think that building up a community is just opening up like a Slack or some open to pull requests, but of course you have to actively sustain a community, which is what a lot of people do not consider from the beginning, that it requires this kind of effort. So I would leave my intervention with this, like it requires efforts, and there's different type of communities, but just setting up the basics right is a great place to start. I need to now jump to my other call, but it was a pleasure to be here, and I'm sure people could also like stay and share a lot of experiences.
We have the same conflict. Ricardo, I'll be joining you in half an hour.
Great, thank you.
Thanks again, Ricardo, for your time and helping and for this discussion with the team. Look forward. Yeah, bye.
Yeah, so
one-on-one now, but yeah.
no, that's great.
Yeah,
so 1 to 51, I had the list of numbers somewhere, which is amazing. And hi everyone, please do reach out if you have ever, like, you want to talk about open source. But actually, I was taking some of the notes on when we talk about contributor sustainability or community growth. First, before I get into exactly some of the strategies, it's a tough thing. It's not easy, and even if you do all things right, sometimes things just don't work, and it's about not giving up. So if you keep doing something, keep doing your marketing right. I talk about 3 C's of community: catch, converse, and carrot. I think this comes from my friend Jono Bacon's book, People Powered. And catch is about you trying to have a shared vision. You're trying to have an aligned goal, aligned value with your target audience. What you are doing, people should be able to see it. People should be able to relate to it. Oh yeah, I would love to do that, or I would love to use that, right? And then being able to create a channel by maybe having low-hanging fruits like good first issues, or low priority, low effort tasks where people can come and participate. Because so those are your catch. Basically, people need to see and understand who you are, and they need to get them into conversation. To point what Ricardo was saying, a place where you can go and hang out, a place where you can go and say hi, understand that there are humans behind this project, because you are going to give your time, your valued time for a project. Your values better be aligned, and you know that this is impacting real people who are working on it, right? I have, my networking has grown. I have met so many people, and some of my best friends are from open source community who I met them randomly on IRCs, just faceless people, random nicks, and then you go into a conference and you meet them because you have so many shared history and talking together and working together, you immediately click, right? So that conversation is incredibly important piece, but so is the catch. Without marketing, without outreach, without highlighting who you are and how you do. So your project charters are very important, your mission, your vision, your community statement. How do you see community to empower your solution? And the last part is the carrot, because it's valued time. Everyone is going to put their time to, obviously, when you contribute to open source project, you learn, you are working on a real life project, you are all those benefit that comes with it, from networking to growth, and great. But also, how should a project from I'm talking about the community manager side. How do you recognize, incentivize, support, and empower your community? Rise, recognize, incentivize, support, and empower. So that's incredibly important. And the piece of carrot comes in many ways: virtual badges, because that can be used to actually showcase your impact in a project, or actually a seat in governance, having open governance where people can participate and become leaders of the project at the end of the day. I started as a user of Fedora project, and now I'm in council. That's a ladder that I had to walk through, learn, meet inspiring people, learn from them, and in the end help a lot of people. right? So having these models are incredibly important for the success of community. How do you listen to them? How do you provide feedback? And there are many things, right? Inclusive space, something that Ricardo mentioned, code of conduct as DEI advisor to Fedora Council is incredibly important to me. If I'm going to give my time to a project, it has to, my values must be aligned, which is about having a safe space for anyone who comes.
Yeah.
You don't want to be have someone who is rude towards Indians, for example. Having a code of conduct is your fundamentals, is that safeguard that allows you to remove those bad fishes from the lake, which is very important. There are bad apples everywhere, and it's internet, right? Everyone is going through something every day, and there are a lot of caps lock typing happening all the time. So COC helps you create that inclusive space. So yeah, these are some of the things that I find really important in community formation or strategy.
Wonderful. To you, it may seem obvious after having been for so long, but I think for a lot of us, these are really great inputs and points, right? And especially for all the contributors who are just starting on their journey, right? On this note, I would also like to encourage all those who are participating to please feel free to post your questions. If there's anything that is on their mind, let's make it a little bit more interactive as well. Just raise your hand and maybe even ask a question directly. I think if the session's more for you as well. I'll kind of just steer this while people are typing in their questions, and then we can come to them. From my side, so we talked about the DPG movement overall, the role of communities. Let's get it one more level down and more relevant to our sort of the cohort that we have, who are engineering students, right? And looking to become part of a community, in many cases, looking to contribute to open source, learn and all that stuff. But how would you describe to them, Vipul, what are the opportunities that participating in something like these or being part of an active community opens up for them looking for in the future?
Before I answer that, I just want to say I love what you are doing, right? I love what C4GT is and every participation in this. Last week, I was at UN headquarters. We were talking about how can we encourage investment on national capacity in open source, right? And there were all these UN agencies from World Bank, WHO, UNHR, human refugees, and UNICEF, UNDP, but also from Japan government, Sweden government, Norway, Germany, all of these different companies, USAID to Medicare, and then a lot of academia. And we were talking about how do we encourage government and how do we ask them to invest in national capacity. This is a pipeline to that. Contributing and participating through C4GT is obviously, it has all the benefits that you get usually by contributing to open source. But something that, again, that I mentioned in my first answer, the third wave of open source, where government is participating and actually making impact of the most needed. So your work is not just going to be used by a community of operating system enthusiasts, but your work is going to be used by people who are actually going to need it, right? It's about reaching the needed. And that's where the digital public infrastructure piece comes in. So what C4GT is doing is creating that pipeline to having a better digital public infrastructure. And in isolation, your work may not look like a lot, but when combined together, when you see that you're a community of many developers and graphic designers and document editors and all of those different pieces that make an open source truly what it is, a successful solution, a scalable solution, you were a major component of it. So that gratification, that understanding that your work was not just about how much money did I make for stakeholder, but very much like what I do at UNICEF. Our North Star goal is how many children's lives we saved, right? How many people in need did you reach out and it helped them in one way or another? That's one of the most beautiful things that you can find of open source and general digital public good. And I think C4GT is a funnel to that.
Great. Yeah. And any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I'll move on. I'll maybe give it a minute or two. Otherwise, I have another question to follow up too. But I'm sure you are inquisitive people and love asking questions.
Ask away anything. I hold the right to not answer if it's not good enough, but don't worry about that. There are no stupid questions.
What book are you reading, Vipul?
What book am I reading? Oh, that's interesting. I'm reading this, The Physics of Filter Coffee. It's a very geeky and nerdy book for someone who's really into coffee. And then I have a few more, but actively, what am I reading right now? But I would say this is what I have been reading for the last 2, 3 days, literally going through graphs and formulas of coffee extraction.
Wow, this is so intriguing.
Yeah, it's out there. It's not for everyone, for sure.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for one more question. So we talked about, like, I think what you answered was the role of C4GT. I mean, maybe I feel like if I could, independent of C4GT, like being part of a community and part of open source, like how should our participants think about like opportunities that this opens up for them, which if they did not to participate in them does not. And maybe on a similar, let's do that first. And then I have a flip question. What are the challenges you see some of people facing, and what would be your advice on overcoming that? But let's first see the opportunities, then we'll come to the challenges.
You see, DPG is not that old. DPG is still a noise organization, like multifaceted organization, in my opinion. What truly drives this is the piece of open source. And when we talk about opportunities, when you work in open source, you see the community involved in different kind of things. I used to be an infrastructure guy. I used to run servers, but every once in a while, when we are trying to do something, we would interact with totally remote group like design. And that's how I learned Inkscape game. So I feel like you get to see so many different stakeholder kind of thing. We often talk about how startups teach you so many things because you are doing all roles. Open source, if you actively participate in a community, that does that too, right? And again, all of these things are so intertwined and tightly coupled that it's not like C4GT, obviously, as I said, like being able to reach the needed, and the DPG, again, the similar thing. But you get all the benefits that open source contribution brings that. And the opportunities to learn better and do better is just like, oh, you're working on open data. How do you make sure that there are no PIIs? What can be considered PIIs? And suddenly when you deal in certain space, you also start learning about policies, right? It allows you to explore different segments, and then you can make better decisions about your future. I used to be, like a lot of people, an engineering student, computer application student at least, right? I always thought, oh, I'm a good programmer and I'll be writing software till end of my day. Doesn't turn that out. Right? When I moved into Fedora project, started doing so many things, I realized community is what I care for. And now I'm very much setting policies and standards for open standards and open policies about how UNICEF should be participating, but general, how UN should be thinking about open source.
Wow.
So when you participate in all of these communities, new doors open to you because you keep seeing all of these new segments and new areas. So you learn more, and then you have better decision of what you want to do in future. I could have been a mediocre engineer for the rest of my life. I'm very glad where I am right now. I'll tell you that, right? None of those other factors, just that I found what I like is very important.
Yeah.
And I feel like a community gives you that because you can easily participate. When you are in a company and you're a developer, you're good luck going and trying to work with marketing guys. They'll tell you, oh, please, you do what you do best. Leave this to us. But in open communities, it's not that. You get to do what you think you can participate and learn at. And I think juggling multiple things, again, not talking from the startup hustle culture, I'm saying juggling multiple things, what interest you to your best capacity is the best way that will open a lot of windows for you because you understand what your interest is. And if you're interested in something, that will drive a lot of your things.
No, wonderful. Cool. No, I think I really like that. Like the opportunity, these community participation opens up for discovering what you're really passionate about, and sort of the ability to do that. In India, there is a joke, right? Like all the engineers become engineers because their parents wanted them to be. So,
Exactly, yeah.
but this is your opportunity to really discover the other passion and contribute there as well. I'm glad there are two questions. Thank you, Divyansh. Thank you, Aniket. So Divyansh is asking Vipul, given that you are such a pro, any tips for beginners starting with open source through this program?
Okay, so everyone is pro to some, I'll tell you that, and everyone is a beginner to some. I was born in 1997. Open source initiative was formed in 1997. Free Software Foundation 1983. So there have been people doing free and open source software way before I was born. So you always have that. Someone adopts early, someone adopts late, some circumstances, some people found interest in it. But again, not a pro, learning every day from all the leaders and as I mentioned last week, I was in the UN headquarters where people who have shaped what open source is, who have defined, like if you go on OSI, opensourceinitiative.com/OSD, which is open source definition, they have defined that on what open source means. Software Freedom Conservancy, SFC, one of my favorite organizations, which fight and which stand for when we say open source, what exactly it means. Those are the organizations upholding those values. They were there. So I'm always learning from everyone else. So as a beginner, I'm sorry, I think I'm missing your questions again, but as a beginner, could you repeat that question again? I lost in the mind.
Any tips for beginners starting with open source? I think there is a joint similar question that Aman also asks, like what kind of mistakes you should not do while doing the open source. So I think you can combine the two.
Anyone who asks me how do I start contribution in open source, my answer is very similar. It's been like that for years now. One, look around yourself. Look for the tools, look for the technology you use and you like, that you'd like to see better. That's a very easy way to find, because there are, remember, the millions of open source, quote unquote, because they are at a different scale of community and sustainability perspective. There are millions of projects out there. The best way is to look in your phone, look in your computer, look at the tools you are using, look at the programming language you are using. Chances of them being open source is quite high, unless they are from a proprietary company built on that, right? And then second piece, align your skills with their requirement. I want to contribute to Firefox, but that's a very mature project. If I go and look at their issues, there are so many things that I don't understand. So it's very important to align your current standard or who you are or what you understand. So aligning your skills, or a project that you really likes requires Go, but you only know Python. Sure, you can learn Go, but learning Go and being able to become that good in Go that you can contribute to that project is a big step. Are you sure you want to commit that big? Because starting small steps in long term is always more sustainable, right? So look around yourself, find a project that you like, align your skills with your interest, and then third, definitely check on the values that I mentioned in one of the answers, because you are going to be spending your time, your resources, you're going to learn from there, but also you're going to give back a lot. It better be aligned. So look for an inclusive project. Look for, if they have a code of conduct, look for how they discuss with each other in open communication channel. Are they kind to new people? If they're a good contribution guideline. Any good open source project will have a mechanism to onboard new contributors on how can you go and participate in it. Look for those cues. Do they really care about open source project, or are they just trying to reach a certain place and it happen to be open source? Align all of these things, and that's what my recommendation would be. Find a project, align your skills, and align values. Very important, all three of them.
Great,
and then
great.
what kind of mistakes? As I said, taking too big of a step, stretching yourself out too thin, taking a feature request or a bug fix that you think, oh, I'm going to put 8 hours every day, I'll find out the bug in 2-3 days, and I'm going to open a pull request by end of the week. Be careful, because it's fine if if you're unable to fix that problem, but it can actually put you down that you were not able to do it. It's very important to take it sustainably. In Fedora project, when we were thinking about community contribution, there's a usual way that it works. People come, they contribute something, then they hang out in the community channels, they get to know people, they make friends, and that's when they become a core community members, because they're hanging out, they're helping each other, and they're contributing. We switch that narrative. You come to Fedora project, you hang out there, make friends, and over time you will find something that suits your requirement and use cases and interest and skills, all of those things, right? So look for such projects. Look for projects which are participating in Outreachy, outreachy.org, which is again a fellowship which is focused on diversity, right? These projects clearly care about their contribution because they are putting money to hire people, paid internship or fellowship, so that they can work on it and become long-term contributor. So think for all these challenges, and the biggest mistake is take it easy. There is, whatever your skill level and your interest is, there is something to do in open source. And your opinion matters a lot. A lot of the time, what holds us back is I'm not good enough, or who is going to care about what I have to say? Youth or young people or newbies, as we say a lot of the time, your values and your opinion matter a lot, because you are the future. You are going to set the next stage of the project. So any good project will have a feedback mechanism, surveys to listen to what you have to say. So don't make a mistake of thinking it's not for you or you are not good enough. And at the same time, also don't take too big of a step or too big of a bite. Don't want to burn your mouth,
Yeah.
right? So these are some of the mistakes that I have seen.
Yeah, as they say, the journey of 1,000 steps start with the first step. So take a first step, and no
Right.
matter kind of, it's almost like there is so much choice that whichever you pick as a first step is the right first step, and then you can build from
Yeah.
there. Wonderful. I'll combine two other questions, and then maybe I think we'll have a last question to close the session for today. I know you also have a hard stop. I think there's a question about, can you share your experience of how you got into a big organization like UNICEF through open source? And also, hi, Vipul, how does your typical day look like as an open source contributor, and roles and responsibility at UNICEF? So I think our contributors are curious about to understand the UNICEF. What does it mean to be a open source advisor at UNICEF, and how did you get there?
It means a lot. It means it's overwhelming at times, but again, as I said, you work towards how many children we saved, not how much money we made for stakeholders. So there's that part, but I'll come back to it. Interested in my journey. Thank you, by the way. Thank you asking question interested to me, which is amazing. So community, again, I was working for Fedora project. I was giving talks. I was organizing conferences. I got part of this open source community, people helping people, right? When you realize that, oh, maybe I was a software developer, Nitin read my LinkedIn bio, I think some of it at the start of the thing. I used to be a software developer. So how did a software developer become a policy guy or this community guy, right? Advising companies to do open source. That seems like a stretch because I found my interest. And because I had community people, the giants who were ready to support me, were ready to give me their shoulders, right? I found out about this opening and I gave it a shot. I had been doing such work for a while now. That's what open source community provides you to. I was working on DEI. I was working on setting policies for contribution guidelines, setting policies on community strategy, doing surveys, editor for community blog. I was doing on how do we communicate better. A lot of these different things that required for this role, I was able to take a head start and actually implement it, learn it from the best, and do it in these open communities. And then when the requirement came and I found that one job that I wanted to do and I applied it, I had all of these things to prove that, hey, look, I have done it, right? Fedora allowed me to, as I said, becoming a mentor for Outreachy, become a mentor for Google Summer of Code, and then leading org admin, working with Google in setting standards on how we should do it,
Wonderful.
right? So a lot of these things allowed me to explore my interest. And then when I found the opportunity, I took it. So coming back to your next question, my roles and responsibilities, I have a few. My biggest role is I help companies and innovators, humanitarian innovators, understand and leverage power of open source. I'm working with 24 companies that UNICEF has invested money in, equity-free funding, and I help them become better open source projects. And now that can go from a lot of how do you use certain license to protect your intellectual property, how do you set business around your open source IP, to as small things as documentation, code of conduct, and how do you have better community onboarding. So my day-to-day, again, just trying to map that with a lot of the times I'm on calls with one of these companies, people who are doing amazing work, be it developing educational app for dyslexic children or doing trying to do disaster management and mapping using drone, or working on solar tech, or trying to predict dengue outbreak before it happens to save thousands and millions of lives. So I'm on call with these amazing people who inspire me every day and trying to tell them why open source matters and how they should be able to doing it, or they should be able to do it and why they should do it, right? Just trying to educate and advocate that open source piece. Then I have a bunch of other roles and responsibilities like driving internal all open source things at UNICEF, generally just be that advocate, keeping the FOSS flag high, free and open source software flag high at UNICEF, working with DPG, working with DPGA around, so representing UNICEF, but also just working with open standards and how can I help them do better. Just researching more requirement, license, compliance, and coming up with policies for UNICEF. So that's my roles and responsibilities. My typical day, I don't have a fixed routine. Like a lot of developers would tell you that. I wake up and I see, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. I am very much a manual note taker, so I have a bunch of lists that I wish to do. And oh yeah, this is what I think. Again, there's no one telling me what I should be doing in open source. So very much I decide, which also like it feels like freedom, but it's a lot more burden because now you are responsible for your success or how much you are doing things.
Yeah.
So you end up, oh yeah, sometimes I work from 9 to 9, sometimes 9 to 5, sometimes 5 to 9, sometimes not at all, right? So my best and my working hour looks very different, but I'll be moving to my Swedish office. That's where my office is located in Sweden, Stockholm. But I'll be moving there next month. That will change a lot of how my day-to-day looks like. And that will also reduce a few calls because I'll be doing more open source internally than with this open source partners that we have. Was that the two questions or did I
Yeah,
miss
yeah,
anything?
no, I think that was great. And thanks for sharing that so openly and candidly. I'm sure a lot of our contributors would find, some of them would have find this inspiring as well. I definitely do as well. Like that seems you're having so much impact. But again, thanks a ton for taking the time out, Vipul, and sharing your insights and with our participants and inspiring them. Any parting words for us for C4GT and for all the participants in terms of the next 2 months where they are looking to be in this dedicated mentoring phase where they will be they are already teamed up with mentors on the projects that they're going to work with. But also a shameless plug for the community program that C4GT itself has also launched as a second leg, right? I would love to see some of our contributors being inspired by your journey and taking more interest, if it matches their interest and passion, into the role of community, which is so critical for this overall movement to succeed. But yeah, any last points, share things that you would want to share?
Yeah, very, very small things, to be honest. Open source is magic. Remember that, kids. There's so much things and empowering things that you can do. Open source got us to Mars. Open source helped us to picture of our first black hole. Open source got us to like get a rover on moon, right? And all of these things is empowered by open source. So it truly is, open source is magic. If you participate in it, it's going to pay back a lot. And again, it takes some effort because anywhere where you're trying to go into a group of leaders of the community or leaders of whatever the solution is, they know it inside out. You are average of 5 people you hang out with. You would have heard that in open source community, you hang out with all kind of people and you pick and choose who are your friends and how you learn from them. A lot of doors open up, from networking to being able to travel and actually seeing the culture and world through these conferences, meeting all these people. Don't do it for that, but that's definitely one of the important benefits. And for C4GT, amazing. Keep doing what you're doing, because as I mentioned, to be able to empower governments, because in almost every country, governments don't recognize the value of open source and technology. And having an organization which can actually highlight these things or get notice of them to do right is very important for our cross-border collaboration. How can we reach, like, bridge that gap of global community and local needs? So bravo, I'm a fan of what you do, and I'm really excited for all of you. If you have any questions, reach out to me over Twitter, and I'll be happy to answer and talk in detail. Don't hold back that your question might be not worth my time. Every question is worth my time. I would love that.
Great, thank you. I know there's Mohammed Zaid posted a question, but Zaid maybe posted on Vipul's Twitter, and if you will follow it up there too, because I think he has a hard stop, so I'd like to.
Oh yeah, I can talk or rant about AI for hours and the problems and the challenges with it. Maybe we'll take it off the screen.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for the opportunity. It was lovely meeting everyone and talking, and I'm looking forward to the next time when we have done a lot
Yeah.
to share stories. Yeah,
We would definitely love to have you involved with C4GT too, Vipul. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day, evening. Bye. Thank you, everyone.